Hello from the underground. How are you? Glad to be back. Glad to see you guys. It's been a little while. A little bit of time taken off from the underground project, and probably well needed, right? We spent some time getting some sun biking around St. Paul. A lot of family stuff coming up, going down. Little brother graduated from college. Dad, old pops, had a birthday. Other brother and I are getting started writing music together again. So the band is kind of doing stuff. Politics are beyond crazy. So if anybody's going to take a little week off to recalibrate and refresh, I don't think that's so far-fetched, I reckon. Plus, we've got plenty of time to hang out and read books together. Yeah, of course. So we're not on the biggest deadline. And that being said, as we can take this at our leisure, it feels doubly as good to get back into this. I propose within the next few days we've finished with Old 𝐎𝐥𝐝 by Balzac and tune our sights on, I don't know, I'm thinking maybe H.G. Wells. Maybe actually, wouldn't it be fun to read some original stuff? Maybe just poetry. Nothing crazy. Nothing terribly presumptuous. Yeah, poetry is not presumptuous, right? No, I think we can have some fun together. And I really appreciate having a little bit of time to, again, just get some sun and try to reconnect with people. There's going to be hopefully some time set aside in the near future for that, but maybe we can find a way to be as creative through that process as possible. I think there will be a way. So let's have some music and some coffee and some book. It's a little late in the day to be drinking coffee. Do as I say, not as I do. I'm sure. Okay, we are continuing on with this translation. Who was it again? It's translation from Hans Gruber. I'm not going to be able to find it in time to save face. With a lovely translation by somebody whose name I think sounds reminiscent of an animal or something. I can't even remember. On page 213 of Balzac's Old 𝐎𝐥𝐝. So, there is justice in heaven, said Eugene. Oh my goodness, what's come over him? Poor dear Monsieur Vautrin. A stroke, cried Mademoiselle 𝐆𝐿𝐼𝐴. Sylvie, quick, girl, run and fetch the doctor, said the widow. Monsieur Rastignac, fly to Monsieur Biancon's. Sylvie may not catch our doctor, Monsieur Grimpel. Rastignac rushed out of the room, glad to have an excuse for leaving that den of horrors. Hurry, Christophe, run along to the chemist's and ask for something that's good for a stroke. Christophe also departed. Now, Father 𝐎𝐿𝐼, can't you give us a hand and get him upstairs to his own room? Vautrin was lifted, carried with some difficulty up the staircase, and laid on his bed. I'm not any use to you here. I'm going to see my daughter, said Monsieur 𝐎𝐿𝐼. Selfish old brute, screamed Madame Fouquet. Be off with you. I only hope you die like a dog. See if you can find some ether, Madame Fouquet, said Mademoiselle 𝐆𝐿𝐼. With some help from Poirier, she had unfastened Vautrin's clothes. Madame Fouquet went downstairs to her room, leaving Mademoiselle 𝐆𝐿𝐼's mistress of the field. Come on, take off his shirt and turn him over, quick. Spare my modesty, and show yourself good for something. Do, instead of standing there like a statue, she said to Poirier. When Vautrin had been turned over, Mademoiselle 𝐆𝐿𝐼 slapped his shoulder smartly, and the 2 fatal letters appeared, standing out white on the reddened patch of skin. My word, it hasn't taken you long to earn your 3,000 francs reward, exclaimed Poirier, holding Vautrin up while Mademoiselle Mauchinu slipped his shirt over his head. Oh, he's heavy, he added as he laid him down. Hush. Now suppose there's a strong box here, said the old maid eagerly. As she spoke, she was scrutinizing everything in the room, down to the smallest article of furniture, with such greedy intensity that her eyes seemed to pierce the walls. Suppose we open that writing desk on some pretext or other? Perhaps it wouldn't be right, replied Poirier. Why not? Said she. It's money stolen from here, there, and everywhere. It doesn't belong to anyone now. But there's no time. I hear that 𝐎𝐥𝐝 woman coming. Here's some ether, said Madame 𝐎𝐥𝐝. Bless my soul. We've a chapter of accidents today indeed. Goodness, that man can't have a stroke. He's as white as a chicken. As a chicken? Repeated Poirier. His heartbeat is regular, said the widow with her hand on his breast. Regular? Said Poirier in an astonished voice. He's well enough. You think so? Asked Poirier. Upon my word, it looks as if he were sleeping. Sylvie's gone to find a doctor. Look, Mademoiselle Mauchinu, he's sniffing at the ether. It's only a spasm. His pulse is steady. He's as strong as a Turk. Just look, Mademoiselle Mauchinu, what a mat of hair he has on his chest. He'll live to be 100. That's the sort of man he is. His wig holds on well, in spite of everything. Gracious, it's glued on. His own hair is red. That's why he wears a wig. They say that redheads are either angels or devils. He would be one of the good ones, I suppose, wouldn't he? Good for hanging, said Poirier. You mean on a pretty woman's neck, exclaimed Mademoiselle Mauchinu hastily. Take yourself off now, Monsieur Poirier. It's woman's business to look after men when you're ill. Besides, for all the use you are, you may as well go about your own affairs, she added. Madame 𝐎𝐥𝐝 and I will take good care of dear Monsieur Vautrin. Poirier went off meekly, without a murmur, like a dog kicked out by his master. Rastignac had gone out for a walk, to breathe in the open air, for he felt suffocated. The evening before, he had made up his mind to prevent this crime, which nevertheless had been committed at the appointed hour. What had happened? What ought he to do now? He trembled at the thought that he might be held to have some complicity in it. Vautrin's coolness made the whole thing still more appalling. Yet what if Vautrin were to die without saying anything? Rastignac asked himself. He hurried along the walk of the Luxembourg, as if a pack of hounds were closing in on him, and he already heard them baying at his heels. Well, Bianchon hailed him. Have you seen the Palot? The Palot was a radical sheet, edited by Monsieur Tissot, which issued an edition for the provinces, with the day's news several hours later than the morning papers, and so brought news of the morning's events into country districts 24 hours earlier than the other local papers. There's a grand story in it, the medical student went on. Young Taillefer fought a duel with Count Franceschini of the Old Guard and got 2 inches of cold steel in his forehead. Here's little Victorine, one of the richest matches in Paris. If we had only known that. What a lottery death is. You draw a ticket, or you don't. Is it true that Victorine cast a favoring eye on you, my lad? Oh, don't talk about it, Bianchon. I shall never marry her. I'm in love with a charming woman, and she loves me. You say that as though it took a great deal out of you to remain faithful to her. Just show me the woman worth sacrificing old Taillefer's fortune for. Are all the devils in hell after me? Cried Rastignac. What in the world is bothering you? Are you mad? Said Bianchon. Here, give me your hand and let me feel your pulse. You're feverish. Just go to Ma 𝐎𝐥𝐝's if you want a patient, said Eugene. That scoundrel Vautrin dropped like a dead man in short time ago. said Bianca. "You confirm my suspicions. I must go and make certain for myself." And he left Eugene alone with his thoughts. The law student walked for a long time, soberly reflecting and considering. He laid his conscience, as it were, before the tribunal of his own mind, and prosecuted a searching inquiry into every hole and corner of it. But although he took a drubbing, suffered pangs of doubt and self-distrust, at least his integrity emerged scatheless from that sharp and terrible trial, like a steel bar that had been tried and stood the test. He remembered the confidences old Goriot had made to him the evening before. He thought again of the rooms chosen for him near Delphine in the Rue des Artois. He took the letter from his pocket, read it again, and kissed it. "A love like this is my sheet anchor," he said to himself. "The poor old man must have suffered dreadfully in his heart. He says nothing about what he has endured, but anyone can guess it. Well, I will look after him as though I were his son. I will fill his life with happiness. If she loves me, she will often come to spend the day near him in my rooms. That grand Comtesse de Restaud is a heartless wretch. She would make a lackey of her father. Dear Delphine, she is kinder to the old fellow. She is worthy of being loved. How happy I shall be this evening." He pulled out a watch and admired it. "Everything has turned out happily for me. When people love each other for always, it is permissible for them to help one another, and I can accept this. Besides, I shall succeed. Of course I shall, and I'll be able to repay it all 100-fold. There's no crime in this liaison, nor anything which could bring a frown to the most austerely virtuous face. How many respectable people contract similar unions? We are deceiving no one, and it is deceit which is degrading. If you lie, you lose your self-respect, surely. She has lived apart from her husband for a long time. Moreover, I will tell that Alsatian and myself that he doesn't know how to make his wife happy. He must give her up to me." Rastignac's battle with himself lasted a long time, and in the end, victory inevitably lay with the virtues of youth. Nevertheless, an irresistible curiosity drew him back to the Maison Vauquer about 4:30, as it was getting dark, though as he went he swore to himself that he would leave it forever. He wanted to know if Vautrin was dead. It had occurred to Bianca to administer an emetic to Vautrin, and he had had the vomited matter taken to the hospital for a chemical analysis. His suspicions were strengthened by Mademoiselle Malconeux's insistence that this matter should be got rid of. Moreover, Vautrin had recovered so quickly that Bianca could not help suspecting that there had been some plot against the jolly fellow, who was the life and soul of the boarding house. When Rastignac came back, Vautrin was standing near the stove in the dining room. The news of the younger Taillefer's duel had brought the boarders in earlier than usual, full of curiosity and anxiety to hear all the details of the affair, and what changes it had wrought in Victorine's destiny. They were all there, except old Goriot, and all busily discussing it. When Eugene came into the room, he saw Vautrin standing there as imperturbably as ever. His eyes met Vautrin's, and he shuddered as he felt that piercing gaze strike home to the depths of his soul and stir to life its darkest impulses. "Well, my dear boy," said the escaped convict, "there's life in the old dog yet, and will be for a long time to come. Death won't put me in the bag so easily. According to these ladies, I've pulled through a stroke that might have killed an ox." "Or you might even say a bull," cried the widow. "Is it possible you are sorry to see me alive?" said Vautrin in a whisper to Eugene, believing he read his thoughts. "You must be confoundedly sure of your own strength." "Mademoiselle Malcorneau was talking the day before yesterday," said Biancan, "of a gentleman called 𝐎𝐥𝐿. Upon my word, that name would suit you very well." This remark seemed to strike Vautrin like a thunderbolt. He turned pale and staggered. His magnetic glance fell like a ray of bright light on Mademoiselle Malcorneau, and the old maid's legs seemed to crumple under her as she felt the impact of the strong will. She collapsed into a chair. Vautrin's expression was so ferocious, that Poirier hastily stepped between them, understanding that the old maid was in danger. The genial mask that had disguised the convict's real nature had gone. The other boarders, still entirely in the dark as to the meaning of this dramatic scene, were staring in blank amazement. At this moment of tension, the tramp of marching soldiers was heard approaching outside, followed by the ring of several rifles grounded on the pavement of the street. As Colin automatically scanned walls and windows for ways of escape, 4 men, headed by the chief of the 𝐎𝐨, appeared in the drawing-room door. "In the name of law and the king," said one of them, but his words were almost drowned by a murmur of astonishment. Then silence fell on the room. The boarders stood aside to let 3 of the men pass. Each one kept his hand in his pocket, grasping a cocked pistol. 2 policemen followed the detectives and guarded the entrance of the drawing room, while 2 others appeared at the doorway opening of the staircase. Outside in the garden, footsteps crunched on the gravel of the paveway that ran along the front of the house, and the rattle of the rifles of several soldiers was heard again under the windows. All ways of escape for 𝐎𝐥𝐿 was thus blocked. Into him every eye was irresistibly drawn. The chief walked straight up to him and began operations by striking him so violently on the head that the wig flew off, and the convict's terrifying head was revealed without disguise. The short, brick-red hair lent a shocking suggestion of strength combined with cunning to the face. The whole head gave an impression of power in harmony with the powerful chest and shoulders, and at that moment the soul and spirit of the man were apparent in his face, as if he stood in a lurid glare thrown by the flames of hell. Everyone present instantly understood the manner of man Vautrin was. His past, present, and future, his pitiless doctrines, his religion of his own good pleasure, the royal power given him by his contemptuous appraisal of other men and his cynical treatment of them, and by the strength of an organization that was prepared for anything and stopped at nothing. The blood rose to his face. His eyes glittered like a wildcat's. He gathered himself for a spring with such infuriated strength. He roared so savagely that his ferocity wrung cries of terror from the boarders. When they saw him thus crouched like a lion for the attack, the detectives, taking advantage of the general uproar to achieve their purpose, drew their pistols. Colin at once realized the danger when he saw the raised firearms shine, and instantly gave proof of his possession of a power of the highest order. The transformation in his face was both impressive and horrifying. It seemed like a phenomenon of nature only comparable to that presented by a boiler room of steam with power enough to heave a mountain up, when a drop of cold water dissipated its force in the twinkling of an eye. The drop of water that cooled his fury was a reflection that flashed across his brain like lightning. He broke into a smile and looked down at his wig. "Today isn't one of your politest days," he said to the chief of the Surya, and he held out his hands to the policeman and motioned them forward with a jerk of his head. "You gentlemen put on the bracelets or the manacles," he said. "I call all here to witness that I make no resistance." A murmur of admiration ran through the room, forced from the onlookers by the vehemence with which the lava and the flames poured from this human volcano, and the rapidity with which they were brought under control. "That takes the wind out of your sails, my hopeful blade," the convict added, looking at the famous detective. "Come on, strip," was the contemptuous answer of the man from the Petite Rue Sainte-Anne. "Why?" said Colin. "There are ladies present. I deny nothing, and I give myself up." He paused and looked around like an orator about to astonish his audience. "Write it all down, Papa 𝐎𝐿𝐴, he said to the little old man with white hair who sat down at the end of the table, with a form for the official report of the arrest, which he had taken from a pocket-book. "I acknowledge myself to be Jacques Collin, otherwise known as Cheat Death, sentenced to 20 years imprisonment, and I have just proved my title to the nickname. If I had so much as raised my hand," he said to the boarders, "I should be raspberry jam splattered all over Vauquer's sacred hearth. Those 3 fine fellows here make it their job to arrange little traps." When she heard this, Madame Vauquer felt rather ill. "Good gracious," she said to Sylvie, "it gives me quite a turn. And me at the Gaîté with him only last night." "Hold on to your philosophy, Ma," reported Colin. "Did it do you any harm to sit in my box at the Gaîté yesterday? And after all, are you any better than us?" he exclaimed. "We bear a mark of shame on our shoulder, but there's a deeper mark in your hearts. You flabby members of a rotting society, the best man among you could not stand up to me." His eyes rested on Rastignac, and he smiled at him, a pleasant smile that looked strange on his harsh, forbidding face. "Our little bargain still holds good, my dear, sweet, innocent lad." "That is, when you accept it." "You know, my dear, Fanchette is charming in her simplicity," he sang. "Don't worry about anything," he added. "I have my ways and means of getting my money in. People find me much too formidable a chap to try and diddle me." The life that this speech suddenly laid bare was life as it is, lived in jail, with its own peculiar manners and languages. Its sudden, sharp transitions from the genial to the horrifying, its appalling power and impotence, its complete lack of respect for anyone and anything, its baseness. And the speaker no longer seemed a mere individual, but was the mouthpiece and the type of a whole degenerate people, a barbarous and brutal, supple yet calmly logical and clear-headed race. As he spoke, Colin became a poet of hell, expressing all impulses and passions that move the human soul, save one, repentance. He looked about him like the fallen archangel whose only wish was for eternal enmity. Rastignac lowered his eyes, acknowledging, in expiation of his secret evil thoughts, the kinship with him that the criminal claimed. "Who betrayed me?" said Colin, and his terrible eyes raked the company. Then came to rest on Mademoiselle Mochineau. "It was you, you old money-grubber," he said. "That fake stroke of apoplexy was your work, nosy Parker. I have only to say 2 words to have your neck wrung within a week. But I forgive you. I am a Christian. Besides, it wasn't you who sold me. But who was it? Ha ha! Are you rummaging up there?" he exclaimed as he heard the police officers opening his cupboards. cupboards and taking possession of his effects. The birds are flown. They left the nest yesterday, and you will learn nothing there. My business books are here, and he tapped his forehead. Now I know who sold me. It must have been the black god �𝐵𝐿. That's who it was, isn't it? Old �𝐥𝐿𝐵𝐿𝐆𝐿 𝐆𝐿𝐵𝐿, he said, turning to the chief. It was timed so neatly to trap our little banknotes while they stayed upstairs. All gone, my little sleuth hounds, nothing left. As for 𝐿𝐵𝐿, he'll be pushing up the daisies in a fortnight. You couldn't save him if you called out the entire police force for his protection. What did you give the Marquenay woman? He asked the policeman. 3,000 francs? Oh, you Ninon of decay, you ragged pompadour, you Venus of Père Lachaise. I was worth more than that. If you had warned me, you should have had 6,000 francs. You didn't imagine that, did you, you old dealer in human flesh? Or I should have had the preference. Yes, I would have given that to avoid a journey that interferes with my plans, then makes me lose some money, he said as they put the handcuffs on his wrists. These people will get some fun out of making me cool my heels to the end of time, just to plague me and give me the blues. If they sent me to prison right away, I should soon be back to work again, in spite of our sweet simpletons at the Cour des Affaires. In there, they'll all move heaven and earth to get their general, good old cheat death out of the Cour. Is there one of you who can say, as I can, that he owns 10,000 brothers all ready to do absolutely anything for him? He asked proudly. There's some good in there, he said, tapping his heart. No one has ever been betrayed by me. Look here, muckworm, do you see? He said to the old maid. They're all afraid of me, but they'll gorge rises at the sight of you. Pick up the pelf you've won. He paused a moment and gazed at the boarders' faces. What blockheads you all are. Have you never seen a convict before? A convict of the stamp of Colin, who stands before you, is a man less lily-livered than the rest, who dares to raise his voice against the colossal fraud of the social contract. That's what Jean-Jacques Rousseau calls it, and I glory in being his pupil. In short, I stand alone against organized authority, with its mass of law courts and police and revenues to back it up, and I beat it hollow. Christ, said the painter, what a marvelous subject. Tell me, hangman's minion, he added, turning to the chief detective, Lord of the Widow. A nickname full of dreadful poetry that convicts give the guillotine. Be a good lad and tell me if it was 𝐿𝐵𝐿 who sold me. I don't want him to suffer for somebody else. It wouldn't be fair. But just then, the men who had been upstairs, examining and making an inventory of everything belonging to Collins, came in again and said a few words in a low voice to the chief. The official preliminaries were complete. Gentlemen, said Collins, turning to the boarders again, they are going to carry me off directly. You have all been very pleasant during my stay among you, and I shall remember that. Accept my farewell good wishes. You will permit me to send you some figs from Provence. He started to move away and turned around to look at Rastignac. Goodbye, Eugene, he said with a sad gentleness in striking contrast to the rough, blunt tone of his previous speeches. If you should get into difficulties, I have left you a devoted friend. In spite of his handcuffs, he managed to assume a defensive posture, called 1, 2, like a fencing master, and lunged. If something goes wrong, apply there. Man and money, they're both at your service. This strange being played the buffoon successfully enough to ensure that no one but Rastignac understood that his last words held a serious meaning. When the house was clear of police, soldiers, and detectives, Sylvie, who was rubbing her mistress' temples with vinegar, looked at the dumbfounded boarders. "Well," she said, "all the same, he was a man, he was." Her words broke the spell which had held them all speechless and motionless while the torrent of diverse emotions and scenes produced overwhelmed them. Now, all the boarders looked at one another, and then, as one man, turned their eyes on Mademoiselle 𝐎𝐥𝐝, crouching near the stove, a lank, bloodless, dried-up figure like a mummy, her eyes downcast as if she were afraid that the shadow of her eye-shade was not deep enough to hide the expression in her eyes. The causes that had produced the appearance of that face, and the antipathy they had felt to it for so long, were suddenly made plain. A low murmur arose as all the boarders, with one accord, expressed unanimous disgust. Mademoiselle 𝐎𝐥𝐝 heard it, and made no movement. Biancan took the lead. He turned to his neighbor and said in an undertone, "If that creature is going to stay here and have dinner with us, I'm off." In a twinkling, it was clear that everyone except Poirier was of the student's mind, and, fortified by the general approval, he bore down on that elderly gentleman. "As you are Mademoiselle 𝐎𝐿𝐿𝐿's special friend, you must speak to her," he said. "Make her understand that she must go at once." "At once," repeated Poirier in astonishment. He went over to the figure by the stove and said something to her in a whisper. "But I've paid my quarter's rent. I've as much a right to be here as everyone else," she said, with a malignant look at the boarders. "Never mind that," said Rastignac. "We'll all club together and pay it back to you." "This gentleman sides with Colin," she said, scrutinizing the student with an expression of venomous inquiry on her face. "It's not difficult to understand why." Eugene sprang forward as if to throw himself on the old maid and strangle her. The treacherous intention of her look was obvious, and it had let in a flood of hideous light into his mind. "Let her alone," cried the boarders. He folded his arms and said nothing. "Let's have done with Mademoiselle Judas," said the painter. "Unless you send that woman packing, Madame 𝐎𝐿𝐿𝐿, we'll all clear out, every one of us, and we'll tell everybody what the place is full of spies and convicts. If you do turn her out, though, we'll hold our tongues about the business, for after all it might happen in the best society, until they take to branding convicts on the forehead, and prevent them dressing themselves up as decent citizens of Paris, and carrying on like a set of silly jokers they all are." When Madame 𝐎𝐿𝐿 heard this, she immediately recovered, as if by a miracle. She sat up, folded her arms, and opened a pair of sharp eyes that showed no trace of tears. "My dear sir, do you want to ruin my boarding-house completely? There's Monsieur Vautrin. Oh, goodness me," she interrupted herself. "I can't help calling him by the name he went under as an honest man. There's one empty room," she went on, "and you want to give me 2 more to let at this time of year when everyone is suited. Gentlemen, we'll take our hats and go and have dinner at 𝐴𝐿𝐿 in the Place Sorbonne," said Biancan. With a single flicker of her eyelids, Madame 𝐎𝐿𝐿 calculated which course would be most advantageous to her interests, and waddled over to Mademoiselle 𝐎𝐿𝐿. "Come, now, my dear kind soul, You don't want to bring my establishment to rack and ruin altogether, do you? You see the proper fix these gentlemen have put me in. Just go to your own room for this evening." "No, no," shouted the boarders. "She must go at once, this very minute." "But she hasn't had any dinner, poor lady," said Poirier politely. "She can go and get it wherever she likes," cried several voices. "Chuck her out, the spy." "Chuck both the spies out." "Gentlemen," cried Poirier, sudden swollen with the courage love lends even to male sheeps, "respect the weaker sex." "Spies don't have any sex," said the painter. "A fine sex-orama. Out into the street-orama. Gentlemen, this behavior is not proper. When you turn people out of the house, you ought to do it politely and show good manners. We have paid our money, and we're staying here," said Poirier, putting on his cap and settling himself in a chair beside Mademoiselle Vauquer, who was being harangued by Madame Vauquer. "Naughty boy," said the painter drolly. "Run along now, naughty little boy." "Well, if you aren't going, we are," said Biancan, and the boarders moved in a body toward the drawing-room door. "Mademoiselle, what do you expect me to do now?" screamed Madame Vauquer. "I'm a ruined woman. You can't stay here. They are running wild, and there'll be violence done before they stop." Mademoiselle Mauquenet rose to her feet. Shouts of, "She's going! She's not going! She is! She isn't!" broke out on all sides, and were repeated in a clamor of assertion and contradiction, together with various suggestions made with a growing hostility as to show how she should be treated. And Mademoiselle Mauquenet found herself obliged to take her departure, though not before she had made some stipulations in a low voice to her hostess. "I'm going to Madame Bernard's," she said with a threatening look. "Go where you like, mademoiselle," reported Madame Vauquer, who regarded it as a murderous stab in the back that she should choose an establishment that was a rival of Madame Vauquer's, and which she naturally detested. "By all means, go to Bernard's. You'll get wine fit to make a goat dance there, and food bought from hawkers at the back door." The boarders stood in 2 rows to let her pass between them in complete silence. Poirier looked so wistfully after Mademoiselle Mauquenet, he showed himself so artlessly undecided whether to follow her or stay, that the boarders, full of relief of getting rid of Mademoiselle Mauquenet, began to look at one another and laugh. "Chick, Poirier," the painter urged him on. "Go on, gee up. The official from the museum started to sing with a comical air the beginning of a well-known ballad. "Leaving for Syria, the handsome young Daunois." "Go on, Poirier, you're dying to go." "Tabhraidh 𝐎𝐥𝐿 𝐵𝐿 said Biancan. "Everyone follows his own fancy. Free translations of Virgil," said the tutor. Mademoiselle Mauquenet glanced at Poirier and made a movement as if to take his arm. He could not resist such an appeal and stepped forward to give the old maid his support. And there was a burst of applause, followed by an explosion of laughter. "Bravo, Poirier! Good old Poirier! Poirier Apollo! Poirier Mars! Poirier the Brave!" Just then a messenger came in with a letter for Madame Vauquer, and when she had read it, she sank on to the back of her chair. "The house will be burnt down next. That's all that's left to happen. It's just one thunderbolt after another. young Taillefer died at 3 o'clock. That's what I get for wishing well on those ladies at that poor young man's expense. Madame 𝐎𝐥𝐿 and Vautrin want me to send them their things. They are going to live with their father. Vautrin's father is allowing her to keep the widow 𝐎𝐥𝐿 with her as a lady companion. 4 rooms to let, 5 lodgers gone. She sat up and seemed on the point of bursting into tears. "A curse has come upon my house," she cried. Then they suddenly heard the rumbling of a carriage drawing up outside. "Here's another windfall for somebody," said Sylvie. "Excuse me." Café. But it was Goriot's flushed face that suddenly appeared at the door. He was beaming with happiness, and looked as if he had taken a new lease of life. "Goriot in a cab," said the lodgers. "It's the end of the world." The old fellow went straight to Eugene, who was standing pensively in a corner, and took him by the arm. "Come on," he said exultantly. "You haven't heard the news, then?" said Eugene. "Vautrin was a convict, and he has just been arrested, and young Taillefer is dead." "Well, what matter?" "There's nothing to do with us," replied old Goriot. "I'm going to dine with my daughter at your house. Do you understand? She is waiting for you. Come on." He tugged so vehemently at Rastignac's arm that he had no choice but to go with him, and Goriot hurried him away like a lover carrying off his sweetheart. "Let's have dinner," cried the painter, and everyone then took his chair and sat down at the table. "Oh, well, I do declare," said fat Sylvie, "everything's gone wrong for us today. Here's my hair-caught mutton is gone and stuck to the saucepan. Oh, it can't be helped. You'll have to eat it burnt." Madame 𝐎𝐿𝐴 was too dispirited to say a word, as she saw 10 persons, where there should have been 18, gathered around her table, but everyone tried to console her and cheer her up. Although the guests talked at first about Vautrin and the events of the day, the conversation soon drifted by devious paths to discussion of such topics as duels, jails, justice, prison life, and laws which ought to be altered. And before long, Jacques Collin, Victorine, and her brother were very far from their thoughts. Although there were only 10 of them, they made noise enough for 20. Indeed, there seemed to be more of them than usual. And that was the only thing that made that dinner different from dinner the day before. Tomorrow, this selfish crew would find another prey to devour, another tidbit to chew over in the day's events of Paris. And now their usual careless indifference to the fate of others resumed its accustomed ways. Madame 𝐎𝐿𝐴, too, let herself be soothed by the voice of hope, speaking in the accents of fat Sylvie. Throughout that long day, persons and scenes had passed before Eugene's dazed eyes like a phantasmagoria, and the day was not yet ended. In spite of his strong will and clear head, he did not know how to disentangle his ideas from the confusion that had overtaken them when he found himself sitting in the cab beside old Goriot, listening to his conversation, which expressed an extraordinary elation, but which sounded to Eugene, stupefied by so much emotion, like words heard in a dream. "It was finished this morning. The 3 of us are dining together. Together! Do you understand? It's 4 years since I have dived with Delphine, my own little Delphine. I'm going to have her for the whole evening. We've been at your rooms since morning. I've been working with my coat off like a porter. I helped carry in the furniture. Oh, you don't know how sweet she is at a table. She'll pet me and look after me. Here, Papa, have some of this, it's nice, she'll say, and after that I can't eat anything. Oh, it's a long time since I've had such a peaceful, happy time with her as we shall have now. Is the whole world standing on its head today? Said Eugene. On its head, said Gorya. The world has never been so sane and normal and cheerful before. I see only smiling faces in the streets, people shaking hands and embracing each other, looking as happy as if they were all going to dine with their daughters and talk in at a nice little dinner I heard her order with my own ears from the chef at the Café d'Anglaise. But there, gall and wormwood would be as sweet as honey in her company. I feel as if I were coming back to life, said Eugene. Hurry up, driver, called Ogoyo, opening the window in front. Go a bit faster. I'll give you 5 francs extra if you get me, you know where, in 10 minutes. When he heard this promise, the driver whipped up his horses and drove through Paris like lightning. This fellow's crawling, said Ogoyo. But where in the world are you taking me? Eugene asked him. To your own house, said Gorya. The cab stopped in front of the Rue d'Artois. The old fellow got out first, then threw 10 francs at the driver, with a reckless generosity of a man who has no wife to curb his extravagances, and who is far too happy to worry about trifles. Come along, upstairs, he said to Rastignac, leading him across the courtyard and up to the 3rd floor at the back door. At the back of the house, which was newly built and of good appearance, the door was opened before Gorya could ring by Therese, Madame de Nucingen's maid, and Eugene found himself in a delightful set of bachelor's rooms, with an anteroom, a little sitting room, a bedroom, and a study, looking on a garden. In the little drawing room, whose furniture and decoration could sustain comparison with the prettiest and most charming rooms in Paris, he saw Delphine in the candlelight. She rose from a low chair by the fireside, put her screen down on the mantelpiece, and said to him in a voice full of tenderness, "So we had to go and fetch you, sir. Now, do you understand?" Therese left the room. The student took Delphine in his arms, hugged her tightly, and shed tears of joy. So much strain and excitement had taxed his heart and brain in that day full of trouble that now the contrast between what lay before his eyes and the scenes he had come through proved the last straw, and his overwrought nerves gave way. I knew very well myself that he loved you, said old Goriot in a low voice to his daughter, while Eugene, completely overcome, lay back on the sofa, unable to utter a word or make sense yet of the way in which the magic wand had been waved for this final transformation scene. But come and see, said Madame de Nucingen, taking his hand and leading him into a room whose carpet, furniture, and even the most trifling ornaments were like those of her own room on a smaller scale. There's no bed, said Rastignac. No, sir, she said, blushing and holding his hand more tightly. Eugene looked at her, and, young as he still was, understood what true modesty lives in the heart of a woman in love. You are one of those beings a man must adore forever, he said in her ear. Yet I can dare to tell you so, since we understood each other so completely. The more intense and sincere love is, the more veiled and mysterious it should be. we must not share our secrets with anyone. Oh, what about me? I'm not anyone, I suppose, grumbled old 𝐿𝐥𝐿. You know quite well what we means you. Ah, that's what I wanted to hear you say. You won't give any heed to me, will you? I shall go and come like a good fairy who is felt to be everywhere but remains unseen. Well, Delphinette, Ninette, Didel, wasn't I right when I said to you, there are some fine rooms in the Rue d'Artois, let's furnish them for him. You didn't want to. Ah, it was I who gave you your happiness as I gave you your life. To be happy, fathers must always be giving. It is ceaselessly giving that makes you really a father. Was that how it came about? Said Eugene. Yes, she wouldn't hear of it. She was afraid that people would say stupid things about her, and if what people say mattered as much as her happiness. But all women dream of doing what she has done. Old 𝐿𝐥𝐿 was talking to himself, for Madame de 𝐿𝐥𝐿 had led Rastignac into the study, and he heard the sound of a kiss, gently though it was taken. The study was in keeping with the elegance of the whole suite, in which, indeed, no fault could be found. Did we guess well what you wanted? She asked, as they came back into the sitting-room for dinner. Yes, he said. Only too well, alas. These rooms are the realization of some fine castles in Spain. They are so well appointed and luxurious. They are all that a young man's fancy could paint as a setting for a life of elegance. I appreciate them too much not to feel that they ought to be mine, but I cannot accept them from you, and I am still too poor to... Oh, so you are resisting me already, she said with a teasing little air of authority, screwing up her face in a charming pout, as women do when they want to laugh some scruple out of existence. But Eugene could not yield to this coaxing and deny his sense of what was right. His heart-searching of that morning were still fresh in his mind, and Vautrin's arrest, by revealing the depth of the pit he had narrowly escaped, had shown him only too clearly that the path appointed out to him by delicacy and by better impulses was the right one. A profound sadness took possession of him. What? Said Madame de 𝐿𝐥𝐿. Would you really refuse? Do you know what such a refusal means? That you are doubtful of the future, that you do not dare bind yourself to me. Are you afraid of betraying my affection then? If you love me, if I love you, why do you shrink from accepting such a trifling obligation? If you only knew how much I have enjoyed seeing to all these arrangements for this bachelor establishment, you would not hesitate any longer. You would beg my pardon for hesitating so long. I had money of yours, and I have spent it well, that's all. You think you are being noble, and it's very petty of you. You are asking for much more. She drew a deep breath as she caught a passionate look from Eugene. And you make a fuss about silly trifles. If you don't love me at all, then you are right to refuse. My fate hangs on one word from you. What have you to say? Father, make him see reason, she added after a pause, turning to 𝐿𝐥𝐿. Does he really believe that I am less sensitive than he about our honor? Old 𝐿𝐥𝐿 was looking on and listening to this pretty lover's quarrel with a fixed smile of a man in a trance. You are a child, she began, again seizing Eugene's hand. You are on the threshold of life. You find a barrier before you that many people find insurmountable. A woman's hands open the way for you, and you draw back. But you are bound to succeed. You will carve a brilliant career for yourself. Success is written on that noble forehead of yours, and you can't repay me then anything I lend you now? Long ago, didn't ladies give armor to their knights, swords, helmets, coats of mail, horses, so that a knight could go and fight in the tournaments in his lady's name? Well, Eugene, the things I offer you are the weapons of the times, tools needed by a man who wants to make himself someone of consequence. That attic you live in must be a pretty place if it's like Papa's room. Come. Are we never to sit down to dinner today? Do you want to make me miserable? Do answer, she asked, catching hold of his hand and shaking it. My heavens, Papa, make him make up his mind, or I will go away and never see him again. I am going to settle the matter for you, said old Goriot, coming out of his rapturous trance. My dear Monsieur Eugene, you are going to borrow money from the Jews, aren't you? There's nothing else for it, said Eugene. Good. You're my customer, then, said the good old man, drawing out a cheap pocketbook of shabby, well-worn leather. I've turned Jew myself. I've paid all the bills. Here they are. You don't owe a farthing for anything here. It doesn't amount to very much. 5,000 francs at most, and I'll lend it to you. You won't refuse me. I'm not a woman. You can write me a receipt on a scrap of paper and pay it back later. Eugene and Delphine looked at each other in surprise, and tears suddenly filled their eyes. Rastignac held out his hand to Goriot and grasped his hand warmly. Well, what's all this about? Are you not my children? Said Goriot. But, my poor father, said Madame de Nucingen, how did you manage to do it? Ah, that's soon told, he replied. When I had persuaded you that you should move him nearer you, I saw you buying things as if you were furnishing rooms for a bride. I said to myself, she's going to find herself in difficulties. The lawyer says that the proceedings against your husband to make him disgorge your fortune would take at least 6 months. Well and good. I have sold the investment that brought me 1,350 louis a year and bought myself a well-secured annuity of 1,200 francs a year for 15,000 francs, and I paid your tradesmen with the rest of the capital, children. As for me, I have a room up above there at 150 francs a year. I can live like a prince on 2 francs a day and still have something left over. I never wear anything out, so I don't need much money to buy new clothes. For the last fortnight, I've been laughing up my sleeves and saying to myself, how happy they're going to be. And, well now, aren't you happy? Oh, Papa, Papa, cried Madame de Nucingen, throwing herself into the arms of her father, who took her on his knee. She covered him with kisses. Her fair hair caressed his cheeks. Her tears fell on his beaming, radiant old face. Dear father, you are a father indeed. There's not another like you in the whole world. Eugene loved you dearly already. What he must feel for you now. Oh, children, cried old Goriot, who for 10 years had not felt his daughter's heart beating against his. Oh, Delphinette, do you want to make me die of joy? My poor heart will break. Come, Monsieur Eugene, your debt is paid already. And the old man strained his daughter to him with such wild and passionate force that she cried out, Oh, you're hurting me. I'm hurting you, he repeated, turning pale. He looked at her with an expression of grief, of more than human poignancy on his face. The face the princes of the palette have depicted on their masterpieces, recording their vision of the agonies suffered by the Saviour of man for the sake of mankind, alone show a grief that could compare with the grief that transfigured the face of this Christ-like father. He very gently kissed the waist that his fingers had grasped too roughly. No, I didn't hurt you, did I? He said, smiling questioningly. It was I who was hurt by that cry of yours. The things cost rather more than that." He whispered in her ear, kissing her cautiously. But I had to throw a little dust in his eye, or he would have been vexed. Eugene was dumbfounded by the man's inexhaustible devotion, and gazed at him with that ingenious admiration that the young feel with almost religious fervor. "I will be worthy of it all," he exclaimed. Maybe that's a good place to stop, just for today. And maybe a good idea too. There's a bit left a day outside for us to go enjoy. We'll resume momentarily, and I look forward to finishing this with you. Farewell from the underground.